My name is Abby, short for Abomination. It was something that my dad made sure to call me when I was born. I am the oldest in a family of 3 kids. My brother was named Bartholomew, and my sister was named Mary. My family was very religious. It made sense, because my father was the reverend of our small town church. My father always had us refer to him as the venom of God. He had hatred for nearly everyone, including me and my siblings. He fashioned himself after Jonathan Edwards and was one of those fire and brimstone preachers. He always preached about God's wrath and how we were blights in his very eyes. I still remember the look of perverted delight that my father had on his face, enjoying frightening his congregation with threats of eternal torture. That was my father then. Looking back, I now realize that there was more to him than just being a radical preacher, something that my family was not ready to realize. In our little town, unexplained murders started to bounce up, about 6. Each one was the same. A woman who was expecting was found dead, and their wombs were hollowed out. One young woman named Gertrude O'Brien. She was someone who was going to have her baby in wedlock, but around the time of her death, she was communicating with another expecting mother on Facebook as part of some friend group dedicated to first-time mothers. Gertrude was found in an alleyway by 2 young boys. Her womb was gutted and her throat was bloody. But the assailant was too hazy with the task because it wasn't a clean cut. The poor woman didn't even get the comfort of bleeding out before she was dissected like a fetal pig. I remember sitting down at the table with my siblings and parents. We were having breakfast. My father was especially displeased that morning. He was disgruntled. His hand shakily grasped his coffee mug, and he looked exhausted. His eyes sporadically bounced around in his sockets to complement his unhinged demeanor. My father studied his coffee mug intently, nearly dropping it when my mom spoke up. "Dear, what's wrong?" she asked innocently. My father fumed in his chair, clenching his fists together. My siblings and I cringed in our chairs in anticipation of him striking Mom. It was something that happened every now and then when my mom made father upset, but thankfully, he regained composure, even if he was still hostile. "It's none of your business, woman." My mother, visibly upset by his stern answer, probed him further for an answer. "Dear, you left the house late at night yesterday. I was worried." He slammed his fist on the table. "Woman, I said it isn't your business." My mother cowered before him. Before anything got physical, the news blared on, catching us all off guard. Everything immediately became silent as the anchorwoman's voice filled the room. "This just in, another woman was found in the town park." The anchorwoman stopped before continuing. "This was the 7th woman to fall victim to the town's eponymous serial killer." Mom turned the television down. She shook her head in disbelief. "It's such a shame. I can't believe that anyone could do something so horrible." My father had the opposite opinion on the recent murders. That should go without saying, but it was disturbing all the same. If you ask me, I think that the killer is doing this sinful town a favor. My mom spun her head around so fast, I was fearful that it would have fallen off. "How could you say such a thing?" My father stood up from his chair, angered. "That woman was a harlot who used her body for unholy living." He crossed his arms in defiance. "I have no sympathy for her." But, she muttered. She couldn't say anything else because she was suddenly struck with my father's mug. The mug crashed onto the floor into a broken mess. Blood trickled from my mom's cheek. My father looked at the floor, then at us with the same evil glare that he always spouted. He then left the room without another word. My mom could only respond by getting on her knees and picking up the broken shards of the coffee mug. A month went by and the same happened without any significant issue. My father would be secluding himself in his study room, and he would spend extensive time away from home. He would come home at around midnight and be as annoyed as ever if my mom tried to ask him where he was going. He said something about browsing the internet for inspiration on his sermons, if he needed any to begin with, as his sermons all amount to "you're bad, so you're going to hell." Your guess would be as good as mine if you were wondering what the internet had to do with him staying away from home for long distances of time. But oddly enough, the more distant he became, the murders stopped. Some speculated that it meant that the killer left town due to the media coverage. The last purported case was that of a 16-year-old girl named Amelia. Word got out that she was thrown out of her home when her parents found out she got pregnant by her boyfriend. Her body was found in a pond. Worms were already eating her exposed organs by the time investigators were alerted to the discovery. Her womb, as with the other woman, was slashed open and the fetus was extracted. Around that time, my father's actions were becoming even more sporadic than usual. He spent several instances in his sermons screaming at the top of his lungs and boasting that he was the decider of people's fates. I don't know what got into the old man, but now he was equating himself to God, and that he was the only one who was bold enough to awaken to his enlightenment. He derided each attendee that they were lambs for the slaughter, and how they were also going to be the first to face the wrath of God. My father became sterner and openly abused me and my siblings alongside my mom. He beat her for trivial reasons such as whenever he was in the mood, when she wanted to sleep. He in turn would deprive her of sleep through his manipulative tactics until she gave in. It only worked about 2 out of the 3 times, or because she spoke out of turn with his sermons. He got in my face constantly telling me that I was a mistake, and because of him falling for my mom's charm, he committed sin by having me. He even rebaptized me with scorching water. My skin developed blisters and became sensitive for a week. Mary wasn't that much better off. He threatened to beat her if she went against him, or he would make me take her place as part of the ultimatum. Bartholomew, he was more lenient with. It just seemed that he despised me, my mother, and Mary. With Bartholomew, while he didn't express any affection for him, he would spend weeks on end trying to indoctrinate him into believing his radical form of Christianity, such as how women were treated in biblical times. He deliberately starved me and Mary by coercing his son to eat bigger portions. Oftentimes, he would deprive us of food for the littlest of slights, perceived or otherwise. Eventually, I could no longer take his mistreatment of me and my sister. While my father was outside tending to the garden, I confronted him, demanding that he stop his tyranny. He practically had a heart attack. He grabbed me by the arm and dragged me into the house. He removed his belt. In a low tone, he forced me to bend over. With my siblings watching, my father gave me 40 lashes on my bottom. The pain surged through my body like a scorpion's sting. My once confident feelings evaporated as I felt my knees collapse on the ground. It was the kind of pain that was unbearable. I looked at my mom to ask her to save me, but she was in a corner of the room, covering her ears to drown out my screaming. My siblings both had looks of astonishment at the unwarranted punishment, but they wouldn't even dream of rebelling against my father. My father dropped the belt on the ground with a thud. He took a couple of minutes to recuperate before regaining his composure. "Let this be a lesson to you and your siblings, and this would be the punishment for disobeying me." One day, it all barreled out into a total disaster. We were at the table eating dinner, with my father absent as usual. Around the time we finished eating, the phone rang. My mother went to the phone and answered it. We heard the usual rambling spiel of my father, but this time, there was something different about it. My mother's eyes widened in shock, and without a second word, she rounded us up and we drove to the town jail. My father was in a dissonant mood, ranting his usual venom of God nonsense. "Are you sure this was my husband?" Mom asked one of the guards. "Ma'am, he tried to assault a young woman." My face rubbed her temples, soaking in everything the guard was telling her. He explained that the woman was a part of that Facebook group for expecting mothers I mentioned earlier. She was going to meet some woman she met online so they could go to the mall. Instead, she was lured to some dark place and jumped by an assailant who tried to kill her with a knife. But the assailant was stagnant in his attacks and she kicked him in the shin until he was forced to let her go. Shortly after, she called the police. They found my father stabbing some garbage bags with a knife in a blind fury. It didn't take long for him to admit to being behind the previous murders. I remember the trial as vividly as I did back then. We were in the stand watching my father laugh to himself as the evidence was laid before the jury. From his confession, the interrogators were able to pinpoint that he was obsessed with taking the unborn fetuses as part of his former summer job of assisting his uncle, a well-known butcher. He saw a woman the same way he saw a cow, pig, or a chicken. Them being pregnant during the murders only increased the thrill he took with dissecting them. The verdict was sound. Guilty in the life sentence in prison. My father stood up from his chair and pointed his finger accusingly at everyone around. He gritted his teeth, emitting some low growl from the pit of his gut. He looked at the families of those he had harmed with a look of complete hatred and disgust. "You will all burn for sending an innocent martyr to death." He smirked before continuing his curse. "All those women were harlots with unholy thoughts and poisoned this world with their perversity. All you who condemn me will suffer my God's wrath." I returned home years later after the events. My mom had filed for a divorce during the time frame and was remarried to another preacher, but thankfully he was nowhere near the insane psychopath my father was. I visit her every now and then just to make sure that the trauma of what she went through with my biological father didn't damage her. As for my father, I never bothered to visit him in prison. I heard he had passed recently. I am confident in my assertion that he is rotting as we speak, his body getting eaten by the worms as his eternal soul is consumed by fire. I at least hope so. I had just found out what became of those fetuses that he ripped out of their mothers' wombs. In a private discussion, my father took 2 of the interrogators to an old farm. Instead, it was a series of scattered bones. It was a typical gray morning. I had finished my usual work in the office on the 25th floor. We weren't even supposed to be working today, but we did it as a favor for the boss. After a quick cup of tea down in the cafeteria, I was heading back to the elevator when I heard the sirens. Usual for this commercial part of town. I walked back to the cafeteria to peek outside. There was nothing out of the ordinary outside. The police cruisers had stopped a little way down the street. I returned back to the elevator. A group of my coworkers joined me, the only coworkers who'd arrived today. We pressed the button that would take us back to our cubicles, and the elevator doors closed. For some reason, the elevator didn't move. It didn't move for nearly a minute. This elevator was extremely old and was prone to such malfunctions. As we stood waiting, the doors opened again and 2 uniformed officers rushed in. They seemed to be in a great hurry. They pressed a button on the pad and the doors closed. The elevator started ascending. The elevator went up a dozen floors before juddering to a sudden halt. The lights inside flickered. We were stuck inside. The officers quickly looked at us. One of them spoke. "Has this elevator been downstairs for the past 5 minutes?" One of my coworkers nodded. The officer seemed to be thinking deeply. He asked us, "Which one of you called us?" All of us shook our heads. He finally sighed and said, "We have a reason to believe that one of you standing in this very elevator is a serial killer." All of us looked at each other. Everyone's faces registered shock and confusion. One of my coworkers, Macy, asked him how he could be so sure. "We received an emergency call about 10 minutes ago. Something about a murder on the topmost floor of this building. The caller told us that the victim was missing his ears and had a swastika painted on his forehead. That's very characteristic of a killer we've been hunting for the past 2 weeks. My colleague Steve asked him, "But why this elevator? I mean, he could have escaped by now, right?" The officer told us, "There's a security cam at the entrance. We asked the guard and he swears he didn't see anybody leave the place. He also told us that all the offices on the other floors are closed due to today being a public holiday, and only a few people who belong to the topmost floor offices had arrived at the request of your supervisor to clear some emergency backlogs." This was perfectly true. From what he says, there are 7 people who work in the topmost office. 1 was murdered. 1 is the caller, who's probably waiting in the same floor because none of you told me you called. And the remaining 5 were in the cafeteria downstairs, and by extension are now in this elevator. There's no alternate exit according to your floor plan in the corridor. The stairs are under repair, collapsed, I presume. This is quite an old building that hasn't been maintained. The killer would have to be either on the topmost floor, the rooftop, or down in the cafeteria by the time we arrived. Rooftop is too obvious. So is the nearly empty topmost floor. Everyone who is in the cafeteria are in this elevator now, so the killer could be the caller, which I highly doubt, or more likely, he could be one of you. The security guy has been standing out all day, and the camera is his testimony. This was clearly a very shrewd officer, not even at the scene of the crime. He'd already narrowed it down to less than 10 suspects. Unfortunately, I was now one of them. This elevator seems to be stuck. Don't worry, we can pass the time by playing a little game. The officer clasped his hands together with relish. The game is called Spot the Serial Killer. None of us moved a muscle. The other officer, who'd been quiet all this while, spoke menacingly, indicating the elevator alarm button. One of you touch this little alarm button here. You'll have to answer to me. Seeing as this officer was hulking in size and had biceps that could crush a wine bottle, that wasn't a particularly appealing choice. The shrewd one went on. Don't worry, Marv. None of these kids are gonna give us any trouble, right, lads? We'll all be leaving this elevator only when the killer among us is exposed. We didn't speak. Macy, Steve, Harry, Emilio, and I all looked at each other. I knew each of them very well, and none was likely to be the type to paint swastikas on anything, let alone chop someone's ears off. Emilio was extremely quiet though, and I was worried about him raising suspicion because I knew he wouldn't hurt a fly. The shrewd one told us the rules of this little game. He'd ask all of us 5 questions. Each of us had to give him an answer. By the end of the questions, he deduced the killer based on the answers. His first question was this: what are your favorite colors? Harry said purple. Steve said orange. Macy was into goth, so she said black. Emilio and I answered red. The officer looked at us wide-eyed. Red. The color of blood. Both Emilio and I stared at him in horror. The officer laughed. I'm just kidding. Relax, he said. The second question was unusual. He asked us why we liked each of those colors. Harry said he liked purple because it was regal, royal, and elegant. Harry had a talent with words. He explained why purple was the king of colors because it was subtle, yet noticeable. Steve shrugged and said he liked orange because he likes oranges. Sounded kinda lame to me. Macy told him about her goth obsession. She said it made her stand out from the rest. She embraced her eccentricity. If anything, that explanation was likely to raise suspicion towards her. She did sound sincere though. Emilio, being the quiet one, simply said, red reminds me of sunset. My mom used to like sunsets. I could hear a tremor of sentiment in his voice. I told him that red was the best color because of how much it is essential in nature. The fruit that keeps doctors away. Red. The fluid that keeps us alive. Red. The lips that attract people. Red. One of the best pitchers in the Major League Baseball. Red Faber. The third question was even weirder. What kind of position would you like to be in if you were recruited as a baseball player? Reasons, please. What did baseball have to do with serial killers? Harry took a while to respond. That was unusual because he usually speaks quickly, even when thinking on his feet. He spoke slow. Catcher? I don't know. I was good at catching stuff, even though I never played baseball for my school or uni. Steve immediately answered batter. He was passionate about baseball, and was basically a walking baseball encyclopedia. Macy shrugged and replied, I don't know. I never liked baseball. One of those guys who run, I guess. Emilio sincerely explained how he thought cricket was a much better game than baseball. I told him I would be a pitcher. I was really good at it, and I wouldn't miss an opportunity to pitch even in school. The fourth question was, what junk food do you prefer to eat? Name the brand also. This made absolutely no sense. Is he going to call me a killer just because I use more ketchup on my pizza? Harry quickly answered that he hadn't eaten any junk food for 2 months because he was on a healthier diet. Steve said Burger King. He loved Whoppers. Macy was also on a diet. Before starting her diet, she was a regular at McDonald's. Emilio said French fries. That was strange because I've never seen him eat French fries. Was he lying? No, Emilio was far too innocent to lie. Maybe I just didn't observe him enough. I answered Doritos. I usually ate a packet thrice a week. I also liked to get a bottle of Coke to go with it. The officer clapped his hands and smiled. He told us, "Guys, I was just bullshitting you. These 4 questions were false alarms, just to observe you. All I need is to ask you this final question, and I'll know the killer." This guy was clever. He observed everyone. I knew very well he'd deduce the killer this time. There was just this air of cleverness around him. This had been fun so far, but unfortunately, I couldn't take the risk now. Quickly, I pulled out my dagger and stabbed Marv in the neck. I slashed my dagger in a circular motion. Macy screamed a bit, and no one would hear her due to a lift jammed between 24 floors. Once everyone was dead, I pocketed their ears and carved swastikas on the wall. I put some blood on my neck and pressed the alarm. I then lay on the floor and played dead. The security guy got the lift running and was horrified to find the gory scene within. He thought I was one of the dead too, and ran. He probably gone for the nearest phone, leaving the exit unguarded. I quickly made it to the cafeteria, wore the clean suits I'd stashed behind the vending machine a day earlier, and washed my face in the bathroom, and folded my bloodied gloves in my pocket. I then ducked beneath the security cam at an angle I knew it wouldn't observe, and walked out into the sunlight. I felt in my pocket. The ears were safe. I'm not writing this to be like, can you believe I just found this out? No. In fact, it was the first thing the realtor told me. His name was Carl Lewis, killed around 15 people in the 70s, she had told me. I had heard of him, did some research on him myself. They had managed to find 9 of the 15 he was accused of. Of 9, he confessed to 4. I'm a man of my word, Carl said at one of his 1972 San Fernando Valley trials. I killed 4. You have 9. Something doesn't add up there, does it? I'm already going away for life. Why would I not confess to them all? He was convicted for all 9 and sentenced to death. Carl Lewis was put to death by lethal injection on March 14, 2003. That was the minimal information I was able to get, and that was digging in the public library here. It wasn't really the largest case of the time since the Gacy trials were happening around when he was caught. So, I felt lucky to even have that. The seller is very eager to let it go, the realtor said, turning over her shoulder and locking her eyes a moment too long to mine. I wasn't sure if the longing for you stares helped her sell more houses or not, but I was already sold. She had later told me that it was the fastest closing she had ever had in her career, and I was moved in by the end of the month. But the reason I'm writing this is because something strange happened recently. I mean, I know that's how a lot of these things go. Something strange happens, and then they proceed to tell you about a series of unrealistic events that happen next. But you're just gonna have to believe me here. I found a box. It's fashioned out of wood and painted red from some cheap craft paint found in the dollar store, but the thing is heavy as hell and has a small brass lock on it to prevent me from opening it. I just unpacked my last box last night, and I have yet to find a key. I was taking some Christmas supplies up to the attic that my girlfriend insisted we have on hand when I found it, alone, in the center of the room. So, I just wanted to pop in here to update where I am now. I'm not for writing, but I'm going to save this with a draft, and I'll write again if I find the key. Okay, so I was checking the mailbox the other day, and all that was in there was a blank envelope with a key. So, I just went to try it on the box and it worked. There was no marks or anything on the envelope. I haven't yet told my girlfriend about the key yet, only because she flipped out when I told her about the box. She wanted me to throw it away, but I told her she was nuts if she thought I was going to throw this away, and then she stormed out. Not my best moment, honestly. Anyways, I opened it, and what was inside was a stack of letters about as thick as a phone book. I haven't read them yet, and honestly, I'm debating if I will. I saw that one of them was labeled Dear Anne, which was the name of Lewis's wife, So I'm guessing these were penned by him. Am I really willing to go down that rabbit hole? So, I read the first letter, and I'm slightly freaking out here. They're definitely written by Lewis. Lewis from prison. The first one was just a long apology letter to his wife. But at the very end, he wrote, "I swear, God Annie, I swear it was only 4. And I can't really tell you why, but I think I believe him. I mean, I obviously have nothing to go off but those few words. But I'm going to read some more. I'm going through all of them, and it's about 2 a.m. There are about 4 letters in the 50+ papers in here. The rest is Lewis building a case for these other people he was accused of murdering. In them, 4 of the bodies he confessed. He later redacts confessions for all of them. Now, why were these cataloged? Why didn't he appeal? Listen, Anne, I know you're going to think that this is all a lie, but I can't stand it anymore. I did not kill any of them. He made me do it. He made me do it. He made me do it. And it just goes on for about a whole page, over and over. I'm gonna call my girlfriend. This is just too weird. My girlfriend thinks I should call the police. I told her there's no point. It's already happened. What can we do about it? I said. What if there's still a serial killer out there? She pleaded. Who's to say we can even believe this? You called me. You seemed to believe it. It was true. She continued, if you're not going to do something about it, then burn it. Get rid of it. I told her to screw off, and she left again. Wrong move, I know, but I just can't get over this. Something happened to Lewis, and I'm going to find out what it was. That night was when I found the book. When I went back up to the attic, it was in the same place as the box was. I don't know who put it there. Inside the book were pictures of the women, the 15, the 6 that weren't found. All of them. It's starting to make sense now. I get it. The book. Lewis had it, and now I have it. And I live in his house. It was meant to be. And those words at the end. So simple. It would be so simple. It would all be for him. My girlfriend is on her way, and this is the last time I'll be updating. I'm sorry I suck at journaling, but I hope I got the gist of this. It starts tonight. Oh wait, I hear her coming up the driveway. This will do. 16. She will do just fine. Thanks for watching, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your story, my email and subreddit will be in the description below. And also, if you're not subscribed, please do if you want. And don't forget to like and comment as well. Have beautiful nightmares. And I will see you next time.